We didn't kiss at City Hall. We shook hands. Rain turned the marriage certificate into blue smears before the ink dried. 20 years of friendship signed away for a lease agreement. No white dress, no flowers. Just two people in thrift store blazers trying not to meet each other's eyes. One signature for a roof. No feelings, no complications, just survival. Julian unlocked the apartment door. Empty hardwood floors, windows too large to hide behind, and in the center, a queen-sized mattress, the only furniture in our entire marriage. He turned, jaw tight, something dark flickering in his eyes. "Welcome home, wife." Afternoon light filtered through the cracked window of my studio apartment, catching dust motes that danced like they had somewhere better to be. I didn't. The eviction notice sat on my drawing desk, partially covered by sketches I'd never finish, illustrations for a children's book about a girl who could build homes out of clouds. The irony wasn't lost on me. I traced the edge of the notice with my pencil, adding unconscious doodles to the margins. Spirals, boxes with no doors, the habitual nervous sketching that had covered every surface I'd ever touched since childhood. 30 days. That's what the bolded text said. 30 days to pack up 6 years of barely surviving in Portland and figure out where people like me went when the city finally pushed us out. Not back to my parents. That ship had sailed when I'd chosen art school over pharmacy. Not to friends' couches. I'd worn out that welcome 2 apartments ago. "You have to stop doing this to yourself, Elara," I said to the empty room, my voice strange and small. But what was the alternative? Crawl back to Minnesota and admit that everyone who'd warned me about the starving artist thing had been right? My phone buzzed. Julian's name appeared with a message. "Sycamore, 7 p.m., your turn to buy." I looked at my bank account. $243 until my next client payment, which was already 3 weeks late. I could afford 1 beer if I skipped breakfast tomorrow. The rain started again, drumming against the window in that relentless Portland way that had seemed romantic when I'd first moved here at 20. Now it just sounded like a clock counting down. "They're calling it workforce housing." Julian pushed the architectural renderings across the sticky bar top, his fingers leaving prints on the glossy paper. "The Haven, supposed to be affordable units for young families." I've been working on the landscape design for 8 months. I pulled the images closer, squinting in the dim light of the Sycamore bar. The building looked like every other glass and steel rectangle colonizing the east side. But the courtyard Julian had designed was different. Terraced gardens, a community greenhouse, trees that would actually grow tall enough to matter. "Families," I repeated, taking a long drink of the cheapest IPA on tap. "Must be nice, having the kind of life where affordable housing is actually designed for you. The rent is still $2,000 a month. In what world is that affordable?" But Julian's voice lacked its usual cynicism. He was staring at the renderings like they meant something, like he'd poured more than just work into them. The bartender swept past us, and I caught the familiar scent of other people's dinners. Burgers and fries I couldn't afford. My stomach reminded me I'd eaten instant ramen for the 3rd day in a row. "They're doing the final lottery next week," Julian continued, "accepting applications from couples who got married in the last 6 months. Priority for people under 30. It's part of some city initiative to keep young professionals from leaving." "Married people," I said, "of course." Something shifted in Julian's expression. He picked up his beer, then set it down without drinking, his architect's hands precise, even in this small gesture. Those hands that could draft perfect 90-degree angles and had helped me move 4 times without ever once suggesting I was a burden. "Elle, when did you say your eviction date was?" The rain hammered harder against the bar's windows. I watched water stream down the glass, distorting the streetlights into abstract shapes. 30 days, but I have a lead on a place in Gresham. It's just further from everything." Gresham. He said it like I'd suggested moving to the moon. "That's an hour commute." You'd lose half your day just getting to client meetings. Well, I'm open to better suggestions. Julian looked at me then, really looked at me, the way he used to when we were kids and he was calculating if we could make a bike ramp work without killing ourselves. That focused intensity that meant he was solving a problem. What if I had one? This was insane. That was my first thought when Julian spread the Excel spreadsheet across my kitchen counter 3 days later, his laptop screen glowing in the early morning light. This was completely, utterly insane. The document was labeled Cohabitation Cost Analysis, in that particular Julian way, organized, color-coded, with a fucking pivot table breaking down utilities per square foot. The application window closes in 48 hours, he said, scrolling through numbers that were supposed to make this sound rational. If we apply as a married couple, we have priority status. The Haven has a 2-year minimum lease, but after that we could transition out. You'd have time to build your client base without worrying about rent. I could finally save enough to start my own firm. I stared at the coffee cup in my hands, one of a mismatched pair Julian had brought over years ago when he'd noticed I'd been drinking from a mason jar. The ceramic was warm against my palms, solid, real, unlike this conversation. You're talking about committing fraud, I said quietly. Marriage fraud, that's a felony. It's not fraud if we're legally married. His logic was impeccable and horrifying. We'd just be married roommates for 2 years. Technically, yes. I stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the panic rising in my chest. My hands found a pen on the counter, and I started drawing on the back of his spreadsheet, sharp, jagged lines that meant nothing. 20 years of friendship. 20 years of Julian being the one stable thing in my chaotic life. The person who'd known me since we'd built blanket forts and promised to always have each other's backs. What if it ruins everything? The question came out smaller than I intended. What if we can't go back? Julian reached over and stilled my hand, stopping the frantic sketching. His fingers were cool and steady against my wrist. Elle, you've been there for every terrible decision I've made since the 6th grade. I watched you eat expired yogurt last week because you were too proud to tell me you'd skip grocery shopping. Again, his voice softened. Let me be there for this. Let me help. This isn't help. This is marriage. This is survival. The rest is just paperwork. But we both knew that wasn't true. You don't fake marry your best friend without consequences. You don't share a lease and a last name and somehow keep pretending the other person doesn't mean something that words like friend stopped covering years ago. I pulled my hand back and picked up the pen again, this time writing at the bottom of his perfect spreadsheet, rules. Julian raised an eyebrow. Rules? If we're doing this, we need rules, boundaries, a contract. A prenup for a fake marriage? But he was already opening a new document on his laptop because that's who Julian was, someone who built structures to keep the chaos at bay. We spent the next hour drafting the agreement. Separate finances, separate dating lives if it came to that, equal division of chores, and the most important rule, the one I made him type in bold at the top of the document, rule number 1, no falling in love. Julian's fingers hesitated on the keyboard for just a moment. Then he hit save. Kiss the bride. The courthouse clerk beamed at us with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for people who still believed in love. Julian and I stood frozen in front of her desk, my hand sweating in his, both of us wearing the closest things we owned to formal wear. My black dress from gallery openings, his charcoal blazer that smelled like cedar, and something distinctly him. We're not really the kissing type, Julian said, his lawyer voice activating. Professional marriage, very modern. The clerk's smile faltered. Behind us, another couple waited, holding flowers and looking at us like we just kicked a puppy. It's traditional, the clerk pressed, for the certificate photo. I felt Julian's thumb brush against my knuckles. Once, twice, our childhood code for trust me. Then he turned to face me, his free hand coming up to cup my elbow with awkward formality. "May I?" he asked, and the ridiculous chivalry of it almost made me laugh. "Just get it over with," I whispered. He leaned in, and I closed my eyes, expecting a quick peck that would satisfy the clerk's need for romance. But Julian's lips brushed the corner of my mouth instead, barely a kiss, more of a promise of one, and the brief contact sent electricity down my spine that had no business being there. When I opened my eyes, he was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. The camera flash went off. The clerk handed us our marriage certificate with a slightly puzzled look. "Congratulations," she said, unconvinced. Outside, the rain started immediately, because of course it did. We stood under the courthouse overhang, married, watching the certificate begin to blur in my hands despite my attempts to shield it. "That was weird," I said. "Extremely weird. We don't have to tell anyone about the almost kiss that wasn't quite a kiss?" Julian's mouth twitched. Probably for the best. But when we ran to his car through the downpour, my hand still tingled where he'd held it, and I caught him glancing at me 3 times during the drive to the apartment, like he was trying to solve an equation that had suddenly gained an unexpected variable. The moving truck idled outside the Haven, exhaust mixing with fog in the early Saturday morning. Everything I owned fit in the back of Julian's Subaru and one small U-Haul trailer. 6 years of adult life reduced to 12 boxes, most of them labeled art supplies in my chaotic handwriting. Julian was already organizing the unloading with military precision, his clipboard listing each box and its designated location. He'd drawn a floor plan. Of course he'd drawn a floor plan. "Books go against the south wall," he called out. "Elara, did you label which boxes have your fragile supplies?" "The ones with the skulls drawn on them." He looked up from his clipboard. "You drew skulls to indicate fragile? It means death if you drop them." A laugh escaped him, sharp and surprised, and something in my chest eased. We could do this. We could be married and still be us. As long as we kept everything light, everything labeled, everything in its proper box. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, corner unit, exactly as the listing had promised. Large windows facing east and south, open floor plan, modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances we'd probably never use since neither of us cooked beyond basic survival meals. I carried a box labeled "Winter Clothes" up the stairs, Julian behind me with his own boxes balanced impossibly steady. The building smelled new, paint and carpet adhesive and possibility. Nothing like my old apartment's permanent eau de mildew. "Kitchen stuff left of the sink," Julian directed as we entered. "Your desk can go by the east window. Best light for drawing." He'd thought about where my desk should go. He'd planned it. I set down my box and turned to really see the space for the first time. The kitchen was separated from the living area by a half wall. The bathroom door was visible from everywhere. In the bedroom? Wait. "Julian," my voice came out strange. "Where's the bedroom?" He'd frozen mid-step, his box of books hovering in his arms. "The listing said 1 bedroom, he said slowly. "Yes, but where is it?" We both turned to look at the space. Open floor plan, very open, completely, horrifyingly open. The only door led to a bathroom with, I walked over to confirm my growing suspicion, frosted glass walls. "It's a studio," I said. "Julian, this is a fucking studio." The listing definitely said 1 bedroom, but his architect's eye was already assessing the space, and I could see the moment the truth hit him. "It's a micro 1 bedroom. The bedroom is," he gestured helplessly at the entire apartment, "here, and the bathroom is see-through. It's frosted glass. That's trendy." I walked to the center of the room, where the movers had placed the queen-size mattress we'd ordered, the only furniture we'd bought, thinking we'd at least have separate rooms to put separate beds in. The mattress sat on the floor like an accusation. "We can't live like this," I said. "Julian, there's nowhere to be alone. There's nowhere to even pretend we're not married, he finished. The rain started again, drops spattering against those huge windows that suddenly felt more like a fishbowl than a feature. I watched Julian set down his box very carefully, saw him do the mental calculation he always did when a design failed, assessing the damage, finding the solution, refusing to panic. "We'll make it work," he said finally. "Room dividers, a curtain around the bed. We're creative people. You're an architect and I'm an illustrator. Neither of those skills include making privacy appear out of thin air." "Elara." He crossed to me, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "We signed a 2-year lease. We're legally married. And the alternative is you in Gresham and me back in that basement apartment with the black mold. So we'll figure it out." I wanted to argue. I wanted to call the whole thing off. Annulment papers filed before we'd even unpacked. But he was right. We were here. We were married. And there was only one bed. A bead of water traced down the frosted glass of the bathroom wall, distorting the shadow of Julian brushing his teeth on the other side. I lay on the mattress, our mattress. I had to start thinking of it that way, staring at the ceiling and trying not to notice how the wet hair shower sounds had stopped, but the water shadow remained. He was getting dressed, right there, 3 feet away behind glass that blurred everything into vague shapes that somehow made it worse than if I could just see clearly. This was day 1 of living as a married couple, and we'd already broken the unspoken rule of pretending we couldn't perceive each other's bodies existing in space. The bathroom door opened. Julian emerged in his pajamas, gray t-shirt and flannel pants, his hair still damp, smelling like mint toothpaste and the cedar soap he'd used since college. "I hung a towel over the bathroom door," he said, not looking at me. "It'll block some of the visibility." Some is better than none." He moved to his side of the mattress. We'd somehow wordlessly established sides already, him by the window, me by the door, and stood there awkwardly, like he was waiting for permission to sleep in his own bed. "This is ridiculous," I said, sitting up. "We've had sleepovers before. We've shared beds at conferences and road trips. This is just another one of those. Those times we weren't married. Legally, we're married. Actually, we're roommates who signed a very complicated lease." "Right." But he didn't move. I pulled back the corner of the duvet, plain gray, purchased yesterday from Target along with sheets and pillows and all the other things that made a house pretend to be a home. "Get in before I change my mind and make you sleep in the bathtub." He slid under the covers, staying so far on his side he was nearly falling off the edge. I mirrored his position, both of us lying rigid on our backs, staring at the ceiling like it might offer instructions for how to be married to your best friend without making it weird. The apartment was too quiet. In my old place, I could always hear Mrs. Chen upstairs arguing with her husband in Cantonese, or the couple next door's headboard rhythmically hitting the wall. Here, there was just the rain and Julian's breathing, and the terrible awareness that we were alone together in a way we'd never been before. "Elle?" His voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah, thanks for doing this. I know it's insane." I turned my head to look at him. His profile was outlined by the window light, the sharp line of his nose, the curve of his mouth that I'd seen 1,000 times and was suddenly seeing differently. "You'd do it for me," I said. "I am doing it for you." "Then we're even," he smiled at the ceiling. "Rule number 1 is going to be harder than I thought." My heart did something complicated. "Which rule?" "You know which rule." I did know. No falling in love. The rule we'd typed in bold and promised to follow. The rule that was already cracking on day 1, hour 1 of this experiment in controlled disaster. "Go to sleep, Julian." "Good night, wife." I closed my eyes and tried to ignore how warm the bed was with another person in it, how the mattress dipped slightly toward his weight, how easy it would be to just roll closer and see what happened next. This was fine. This was manageable. This was just survival. I almost believed it. The coffee maker sputtered its last drops into the pot, and I grabbed it before Julian could reach around me, my hip bumping his as we both tried to navigate the narrow kitchen space at 7 in the morning. "Sorry," we said simultaneously. "You go first," Julian added, backing up half a step. "No, you need it more. You have that presentation. Your client call is at 9. We stood there, both of us uncaffeinated and stupid, having our first married argument about coffee hierarchy. Finally, I poured half a cup and handed it to him, then poured my own. His fingers brushed mine as he took it, and we both jerked back like we'd been burned. "This is sustainable," I muttered. "Completely normal newlywed behavior." I leaned against the counter, cradling my coffee, and watching Julian attempt to simultaneously drink and check his phone and not stand too close to me. He'd added sugar to his cup, 2 spoonfuls, precise, and I'd watched him do it without thinking, the same way he'd watched me grab the oat milk from the fridge because dairy made me break out. 20 years of knowing someone's coffee order shouldn't feel intimate, but in this kitchen, in this apartment, everything felt loaded with meaning it didn't have before. "I'm meeting with the Haven's property manager this afternoon," Julian said, scrolling through his calendar. "They want to do a welcome interview with new residents, get quotes for their website." I nearly choked on my coffee. "An interview? As a couple?" "As residents, but yes, we should probably coordinate our story." "Our story, right, because we're married." "We are married." He said it matter-of-factly, like stating that water was wet or Portland had rain. We knew this would require some performance. Performance is showing up to your parents' dinner parties and pretending I'm not dying inside. Performance is not lying to a property manager about how we fell in love. We don't have to say we fell in love. We can say we've known each other forever, decided it made financial sense to partner up, keep it vague. Financial sense, so romantic. Julian set down his coffee cup, his architect hands flat on the counter. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "What do you want me to say? That we should tell them the truth and risk losing the apartment? That we should make up some elaborate love story that neither of us could keep straight? We made a choice, Elara. We have to see it through." He was right. Of course he was right. But standing in this too-small kitchen, drinking coffee in my pajamas while my legal husband lectured me about commitment, the absurdity of our situation hit me all over again. "Fine," I said. "We'll coordinate, but I'm not calling you honey. Wouldn't dream of it. Or holding hands for photos. That's literally the least weird thing we've done." I thought about the almost kiss at City Hall, about sleeping next to him last night with 18 inches of mattress between us that felt like 18 inches of possibility. He was wrong. Hand-holding would definitely be weird. My phone buzzed with a reminder about my client call. I had 45 minutes to make myself look professional and creative, and definitely not like someone who'd committed marriage fraud for affordable housing. "I need to shower," I said. Julian glanced at the bathroom with its frosted glass walls, then very deliberately looked away. "I'll go for a walk. Give you privacy." "Julian, you can't go for a walk every time I need to use the bathroom." "Today I can." He grabbed his jacket and left before I could argue, and I stood alone in our apartment, our home, our marriage, wondering how long we could keep pretending this was just an arrangement before one of us admitted it had always been more than that. The property manager's heels clicked against the hardwood as she walked through our apartment, clipboard in hand, smile pleasant and terrifying. Janet Moreno, according to her business card, Director of Resident Services, keeper of our housing fate. "This is just a formality," she said, examining the space with the kind of attention that meant it definitely wasn't. "The Haven prides itself on building community. We like to know our residents, especially those selected through the workforce housing program." Julian's hand found the small of my back, a gesture that should have felt natural after 2 weeks of marriage, but instead sent my nervous system into overdrive. I forced myself not to flinch away. "We're honored to be here," Julian said, his voice smooth with the professional charm he used for client presentations. The landscape design alone is what sold us. The attention to sustainability is remarkable. You're a landscape architect, is that right? Janet made a note on her clipboard. Yes, ma'am, with Morrison Green Design, though I hope to start my own firm eventually. And you, Elara? Those sharp eyes turned to me. The application said illustrator? Freelance, mostly children's books and editorial work. I tried to smile naturally, but my face felt like it was made of plastic. Janet wandered toward the kitchen, her gaze sweeping across the half wall to our living space. We tried to make it look lived in. Julian's architecture books on the floor by the window, my sketchbooks scattered on my desk, a wedding photo from City Hall in a Target frame on the kitchen counter, the wedding photo she was now picking up. You two look so serious, Janet observed. Not many couples manage to look contemplative on their wedding day. We're not very traditional, I said quickly. Clearly, she set the photo down, and I couldn't tell if that was approval or judgment in her voice. How long have you known each other? 20 years, Julian answered. We grew up together in Minnesota. And you've been dating? There was a pause, half a second too long. I watched Julian calculate the lie, saw the micro expression of discomfort before he smoothed it away. It's complicated, I cut in, grabbing his hand and squeezing probably too hard. We were friends for so long, the transition to more happened gradually. Hard to pinpoint an exact date. I see. More notes on the clipboard. And the decision to marry quickly? When you know, Julian said, and the words sounded so much like a line from a movie that I wanted to die. Janet smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I only asked because the Havens subsidized housing program is funded by a city grant specifically designed for young families establishing roots. We've had incidents in other buildings, people gaming the system. I'm sure you understand why we're vigilant. My palm was sweating against Julian's. He squeezed back twice, our code, and I understood. Don't panic. Follow his lead. Of course, I said. We're planning to be here long term. Julian's career is here. My clients are here. This is home. Wonderful. Janet checked something off on her form. I'll need to schedule a follow-up in 3 months, just to see how you're settling in. Answer any questions. Standard procedure. No problem, Julian said. She moved toward the door, then paused at the bathroom, taking in the frosted glass walls with an expression I couldn't quite read. Interesting design choice, very open. Modern, Julian supplied. Intimate, Janet corrected. When she finally left, I collapsed onto the couch we'd bought last week. Gray microfiber, chosen because it was cheap and neither of us hated it. Julian sat next to me, his head falling back against the cushions. That was awful, I said. That was a warning. You think she knows? I think she's suspicious, and I think we just signed up for 3 months of proving we're actually in love. I turned to look at him. His eyes were closed, his jaw tight with stress. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow from when we were 12, and I'd accidentally hit him with a swing. I'd cried harder than he had, terrified I'd hurt him permanently. We're terrible at this, I whispered. We've been married for 2 weeks and barely touch each other except when someone's watching. She noticed. So what do? Julian opened his eyes and met my gaze. We learn how to be convincing, how to act like a couple that actually, he trailed off, likes each other, wants each other. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications neither of us was ready to address. Because that was the real trap, wasn't it? The Havens open floor plan, the frosted glass bathroom, the single mattress, all of it forcing us into an intimacy we'd agreed to fake. But faking intimacy required real vulnerability. And vulnerability with Julian felt more dangerous than any eviction notice. 3 months, I said finally. We can pretend for 3 months. Right, pretend. But when he looked at me, his dark eyes holding mine for 1 beat too long, I wondered if either of us was still pretending at all. That's my shirt. I froze mid-reach for the coffee maker, suddenly aware that I'd grabbed the first clean thing from the laundry basket without checking whose side it came from. Julian's navy Henley hung loose on my frame, the sleeves falling past my hands. Sorry, I thought it was... But I stopped because that was a lie. I'd known it was his. It had smelled like him when I'd pulled it on in my half-asleep state, and some stupid part of my brain had decided that was comforting rather than crossing a line. Julian stood in the kitchen doorway in his running gear, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, his hair damp. He'd been going on longer runs lately, 45 minutes this morning according to the time he'd left, escaping the apartment, escaping me. "Keep it," he said after a moment. "Looks better on you anyway." The compliment landed wrong, too familiar and not familiar enough all at once. I busied myself with the coffee, but I could feel him moving behind me, opening the fridge, pulling out the orange juice, both of us performing this choreographed dance of not touching in our too small kitchen. "You have a work thing today?" I asked, desperate for normal conversation. "Site visit at 9, then the Morrison meeting about the River District project. The one you've been dreading? The one where they'll probably tell me my designs are too expensive and go with something cheaper and uglier." He poured juice into a glass, and I noticed his hand wasn't quite steady. Stress or proximity? "You?" "Client revisions. The publisher decided the main character needs to be less sad, more spunky, because children experiencing loss should definitely just perk up." Julian's mouth twitched into almost smile. "Your favorite note. Right up there with Make It Pop." We stood there, coffee and juice, his shirt on my body, the morning light turning everything golden and soft. This was dangerous. This casual domesticity, this ease of knowing each other's schedules and pet peeves, and the exact tone of voice that meant the workday was already exhausting before it began. "Elara," he said my name like a question. "Yeah? We should probably talk about..." His phone buzzed. Work. Always work, providing convenient interruptions when conversations got too close to real. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. "Morrison, I need to take this." He disappeared into the bathroom, the only place in the apartment that offered the illusion of privacy, and I heard his voice shift into professional mode. Polished, controlled, nothing like the way he said my name. I looked down at his shirt, at how the fabric pooled around me, and wondered when wearing my husband's clothes had started feeling more like a confession than a convenience. The kitchen smelled like burnt garlic. "I don't think the recipe meant blackened," I said, peering into the pan where our stir-fry had become a crime scene. Julian stood next to me, looking at the carnage. The heat was too high. "It's your stove." "It's our stove." The correction was quiet, but it changed the air. Our stove, our kitchen, our marriage that kept turning into moments like this, standing too close, the line between pretend and real getting harder to see. "We could order pizza," I suggested. "We ordered pizza 3 times this week." "That was before I knew you'd try to flambe vegetables." He pulled out his phone, frustrated. Not about the food, about everything we weren't saying. I caught his wrist. "We can try again tomorrow. It's just dinner." "It's not just dinner, Elle. It's learning to live together. Actually live together. We're learning. Give us time." We ate pizza on the couch later, neither of us paying attention to the TV. When his hand brushed mine reaching for the last slice, neither of us moved away quickly. And when I fell asleep against his shoulder, he pulled the blanket over both of us and let me stay. Pretending. We were still pretending. I was getting really bad at remembering what we were pretending about. My fingers moved across the tablet screen, sketching the princess from the book I'd been hired to illustrate. A girl learning to build bridges instead of waiting to be rescued. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in our apartment, living in my own strange rescue mission that required pretending I didn't need rescuing at all. Julian was at his desk by the window, bent over blueprints with that focused intensity that meant he'd forgotten to eat lunch again. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. I knew because I checked, because apparently I developed the ability to track his routines without consciously trying. The afternoon light caught the curve of his neck, the line of his jaw, and my hand, traitorous thing, started sketching him instead of the princess. Just rough lines at first. The angle of his concentration, the way his hair fell forward when he leaned in close to his work. I'd drawn Julian 1,000 times over the years. Caricatures in high school. Life drawing practice in art school when he'd reluctantly agreed to model. But this was different. This was studying him like I was trying to memorize something I might lose. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "I'm working." "You're sketching me. I can feel it." Damn the man for knowing me too well. I closed the program, switching to the princess file. "Ego much?" 20 years of being your favorite subject gives me pattern recognition." He finally looked up, catching me mid-guilt. "Can I see?" "It's nothing, just warm-up sketches." "Elara." The way he said my name, patient, knowing, with that underlying current of something I didn't want to name, made me rotate the tablet toward him. His warm-up sketch looked back at us, intimate in a way that made my chest tight. Julian's expression shifted, not uncomfortable, but aware, like he just confirmed something he'd suspected. "You made me look softer than I am," he said quietly. "I drew what I saw. Then you see me differently than I see myself." The conversation was veering into territory we'd been carefully avoiding. I pulled the tablet back, set it aside. "Should I make you more angular? More brooding architect?" "You should draw what's true. What's true is that you forgot lunch again and your coffee is cold." He glanced at his mug like he'd forgotten it existed. "You keeping track of my meals now?" "Someone has to." "That's very wife-like of you. That's very husband-like of you to point out." We were testing the words, trying them on like costumes for the performance we'd signed up for. But they didn't feel like costumes anymore. They felt like truths we were using jokes to soften. Julian stood, stretched, his shirt riding up to show a strip of stomach that I definitely didn't notice. "I'm making actual lunch. Sandwiches. Even I can't burn sandwiches." Famous last words. But I followed him to the kitchen anyway, and when he handed me a perfectly assembled turkey and Swiss, our fingers touched for 3 seconds longer than necessary. His thumb brushed my knuckles. Once, twice, our code. But this time it didn't mean, "Trust me." It meant, "I'm here. I'm noticing. This is changing." I bit into my sandwich and tried to remember rule number 1, typed in bold at the top of our contract. No falling in love. We'd been married 3 weeks, and I was pretty sure I'd been breaking that rule for at least 3 years. The envelope came during dinner. Julian went pale as he read the letter, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. I watched the color drain from his face in real time, watched his architect's mind calculate disaster. "What is it?" He handed me the paper without speaking. Official Haven letterhead, formal language, the kind of corporate speak that always preceded bad news. "Audit," I read aloud. "Random selection of workforce housing residents to verify eligibility requirements. Interview scheduled for next Thursday at 2 p.m. Both parties required to attend." "They're going to ask us everything," Julian said. His voice was too level, the calm that meant internal panic. "How we met, how we fell in love, what we know about each other. They're going to know we're lying." I set down the letter, my appetite gone. "We're not lying. We are married. We do live together." "You know what I mean." "So we prepare. We get our story straight." "Elara, people who are actually in love don't need to rehearse their origin system. People who are actually in love also don't have 20 years of history to edit down into a coherent narrative." Julian pushed back from the table, started pacing the length of our small apartment, 8 steps from the window to the kitchen, turn, repeat. I'd watched him pace like this before exams, before presentations, before every big moment where control might slip. "Tell me something no one else knows about you," he said suddenly. What? If we're going to pass as a couple, we need to know the things couples know, the secrets, the embarrassing stories, the random details that prove intimacy. I thought about all the things I'd never told Julian, the real reasons I'd left Minnesota, the panic attacks I got before client calls, the fact that I'd been half in love with him since we were 19, and he'd driven 4 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu. You first, I countered. He stopped pacing, turned to face me. The kitchen light cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more serious. I'm afraid I'm going to fail at architecture the way my dad failed at everything he touched, that I inherited his talent for disappointment. The confession hit like a physical blow. I'd known Julian's father, the drunk who'd left when Julian was 14, the ghost that haunted every ambitious thing Julian built. You're not him, I said fiercely. You're nothing like him. How do you know? I'm 27 with a degree I can't use, working for someone else's vision, married to my best friend out of desperation. You married me to help me. That's not the same thing. I married you because I couldn't stand the thought of you leaving Portland, of losing you to Gresham or Minnesota or wherever you'd end up next. He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. That's not noble. That's selfish. That's love, you idiot. The word dropped between us like a grenade. We both stared at each other, realizing what I'd said, unable to take it back. Not, I stammered. I didn't mean romantic love. I meant friendship love. The normal kind. The kind we agreed on. Right, the normal kind. But his eyes said different, and my pulse said different. And the space between us felt charged with 3 weeks of sleeping in the same bed and sharing clothes and learning each other's coffee orders like prayer. My secret, I said, needing to break the moment before I said something I couldn't unsay. I'm afraid that I'm only good at temporary things. Temporary apartments, temporary jobs, temporary relationships. That I don't know how to stay. You're still here because I signed a lease. You're still here because you chose to be. The audit letter sat between us on the table, a reminder that our choices were about to be examined, judged, potentially exposed. We had 6 days to become convincing liars, or to become what we'd been pretending we weren't. Thursday, Julian said quietly, we'll be ready. I wanted to believe him, but as I watched him return to his pacing, I wondered if you could ever really be ready for the moment when your carefully constructed lies started looking too much like truth. A list materialized on the kitchen counter, appearing sometime between midnight and morning. Julian's architect handwriting, precise block letters organizing chaos into manageable tasks. Audit prep, questions to expect, first date location/details, proposal story, family reactions to marriage, living habits, quirks, future plans, kids, career, etc. Why Portland? Financial arrangements, conflict resolution examples. I found him at his desk, working through lunch again despite my yesterday lecture, surrounded by more lists. The man solved problems through organization. It was comforting and devastating in equal measure. You made homework, I said, holding up the kitchen list. We have 5 days. We need answers that match. Or we could just tell the truth. He looked up, and there were shadows under his eyes. Which truth? That we committed fraud? That we're roommates who signed a marriage license? Or that we're... He stopped, reconsidered. We need a coherent story. I pulled up a chair next to him, close enough to see the other documents he'd been working on. Spreadsheets of our relationship timeline. A calendar marking imaginary milestones. A photo album he'd started assembling from pictures we actually had from the last 20 years. Birthday parties and road trips and stupid selfies, now being recontextualized as a romance. You've been up all night, I observed. Couldn't sleep. Because of the audit? Among other things. His hand rested on the desk between us, and I noticed the callus on his middle finger from holding pencils. the slight tremble that meant too much coffee and not enough food. Without thinking, I covered his hand with mine. "We'll figure this out," I said. He turned his palm up, lacing our fingers together, and the gesture felt less like comfort and more like confession. His thumb traced the inside of my wrist where my pulse beat too fast. "First date," he said, his voice low. "What should we say?" "The truth. That bar, 3 years ago. When I dragged you out for my birthday and we closed the place down talking about everything except the fact that you'd just gotten dumped and I just lost my biggest client. That wasn't a date. Pretend it was. What changed that night from friendship to more?" Julian's eyes met mine, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "You laughed at my terrible joke about cantilever bridges, and I realized I'd spent the whole night watching your mouth instead of listening to your words. That was the first time I let myself admit I was attracted to you." "That's," I swallowed, "that's good, specific." "It's true." The word hung between us, heavy with implication. His thumb still traced patterns on my wrist, and I couldn't tell if we were rehearsing or confessing. "Proposal story," I prompted, needing to keep moving through the list before I did something stupid like lean closer. "How did you ask me to marry you?" "I didn't. We agreed on it together after several spreadsheets and a legally dubious contract." "But what should we say?" Julian's hand tightened on mine. "That I asked you in this apartment, on the day we moved in, when I realized that home wasn't the address, it was you." My heart stopped. "Julian." "For the audit," he clarified quickly. "That's what I'd say. For the story." "Right, the story." But when he looked at me, I saw the same confusion I felt reflected back. The line between performance and reality was blurring, and neither of us seemed capable of drawing it back into focus. We spent the next 3 hours building our fictional romance out of real moments, turning inside jokes into meet-cute material, transforming quiet evenings into romantic turning points. By the end, we created a love story that felt true in all the ways that terrified me. "We're good at this," Julian said as we reviewed the final timeline. "Maybe too good. Is there such a thing as too convincing when you're trying not to get evicted?" I wanted to say yes, that there was danger in stories you told so well you started believing them. But his hand was still holding mine, and I couldn't remember when we'd stopped pretending the touch was just for practice. "No, absolutely not. Try again." Julian stood in the middle of the apartment, arms crossed, looking at me like I just suggested we burn down the building. "What's wrong with 'I love you'?" You said it like you were ordering coffee, monotone, zero emotion. "I'm practicing the words, not performing Shakespeare. The auditor will be watching for genuine affection. You just sounded like a robot achieving sentience." He threw his hands up. "Then you demonstrate. Show me how it's supposed to sound." This was day 4 of audit prep, and we devolved into what could only be described as the world's most awkward acting class. We'd covered our backstory, aligned our timelines, memorized each other's coffee orders and childhood pets, and every detail that proved we were real. Now we were working on the physical tells, the casual intimacy that couples displayed without thinking, and we were failing spectacularly. "Fine." I crossed to him, aware of the way his jaw tightened as I got closer. "Say it like you mean it. Look at me. Actually look." Julian's eyes met mine, and I saw him wrestle with something internal. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, rougher. "I love you." My breath caught. That wasn't practice, that was... "Better?" he asked. "Yeah, that was... believable. Your turn." I should have stepped back, created distance, reminded us both that this was just preparation for an interview that could make or break our housing situation. Instead, I stayed close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to catch the cedar scent of his soap. "I love you," I whispered. "Like you're afraid of it," he said. "Try again." "I am afraid of it. Elara, my name was almost a warning. We're practicing. Are we? The question sat between us, sharp and unavoidable. His hand came up to cup my elbow, that same awkward gesture from City Hall, but this time it didn't feel forced. It felt like an anchor. We need to be able to touch each other naturally, he said. The auditor will notice if we flinch every time we make contact. I don't flinch. You absolutely flinch, every time, like I'm contagious. You're not contagious, you're just close, warm. Looking at me like the past 4 days of playing pretend had stripped away his carefully maintained control. This is weird. It doesn't have to be. He pulled me closer, his hands sliding from my elbow to my waist, and suddenly we were standing the way couples stood. His other hand came up to tuck my hair behind my ear, a gesture that should have felt staged, but instead felt like something he'd been wanting to do for weeks. We've known each other 20 years, he said softly. We've hugged goodbye 1,000 times. This is just an extension of that. Extensions of hugs don't usually involve your hand on my waist. Should I move it? No. The admission cost me. I watched something flicker in his expression, saw the exact moment he registered what I'd said versus what I'd meant to say. His thumb brushed my hip bone through my shirt, and I forgot how to breathe properly. Thursday, he said. We have to survive Thursday. And then what? Then we have 3 months until the follow-up audit. Then 2 years until the lease ends. Then we can stop pretending? His hand tightened on my waist. Is that what you want? The question was loaded with landmines. I could feel us approaching the edge of something we couldn't come back from. One of us needed to be smart, to pull back, to remember rule number 1. I want to not get evicted, I said instead. That's not an answer to my question. It's the only safe answer I have. We stood there, barely 6 inches between us, both afraid to close the distance and afraid to step away. Finally, Julian released me, running his hand through his hair in frustration. We should practice other scenarios, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Questions about conflict resolution, how we handle disagreements. We're handling one right now. And how would you say we're doing? Terribly, convincingly terribly, like a real couple. Despite everything, he smiled. There, that's progress. But as we moved on to the next item on his endless list, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were preparing for the wrong test. The audit would determine if we kept the apartment, but the real question was whether we'd survive what came after. When the performance ended and we had to face what we'd been pretending wasn't real. Rain made the windows weep, distorting the city lights into abstract watercolors. I stood by the glass, tablet abandoned on the desk behind me, watching the storm and trying not to think about tomorrow's audit. Julian's reflection appeared next to mine, his arms crossed, both of us looking out at Portland doing what Portland did best. The silence between us felt different than it used to, heavier, more aware. Can't sleep? He asked. Too busy catastrophizing all the ways we could fail tomorrow. I made contingency plans for 17 different disaster scenarios. Only 17? I'm trying to be realistic. I smiled despite myself. This was us, me spiraling, him organizing, both of us pretending we had control over things that were fundamentally uncertain. Julian? I kept my eyes on the window. What happens if they don't believe us? They will. But if they don't, if we lose the apartment? He moved closer, shoulder brushing mine. Then we figure something else out, together. You'd lose your savings, your chance to start your firm. I'd still have you. The words were simple, matter-of-fact, and completely devastating. I finally turned to look at him, finding his face reflected in the dark glass, our images overlapping like a double exposure. That's not part of the deal, I said quietly. You get the apartment for 2 years. I get stability while I build my career. After that, we go back to normal. Define normal. Friends, roommates who aren't married, people who have separate lives, Elara. He turned to face me fully, and suddenly the window reflection was gone, replaced by the real thing. His dark eyes serious, his expression unguarded in a way I rarely saw. Do you honestly think we can go back after this? We have to. That was the agreement. Fuck the agreement. I blinked. Julian never swore unless he was past the point of careful control. What? The contract, rule number 1, all of it. Do you really think we can spend 2 years playing house and then just stop? Go back to being friends who grab beers and don't live together? That's what we signed up for. Maybe I signed up for the wrong thing. My heart was doing something complicated and dangerous. Don't. Don't say things you'll regret after tomorrow when we're stressed and scared. I'm not scared of the audit. I'm terrified of getting through it successfully and spending the next 2 years pretending this is just an arrangement. Julian, I watch you wear my clothes. I know how you take your coffee before you've said a word in the morning. I sleep 6 inches away from you every night and lie awake trying not to think about closing that distance. Tell me that's normal friendship behavior. It's situational adaptation. We're adjusting to cohabitation. You're using your client pitch voice, the one you use when you're trying to convince yourself of something. He was right. I was. Because the alternative was admitting that rule number 1 was broken, had been broken for weeks, maybe years before we'd ever signed the marriage license. What do you want me to say? I asked. That I'm falling for this too? That sleeping next to you is the best and worst part of my day? That I'm terrified because this was supposed to be temporary and safe, and now it feels like everything? Yes, say that. I can't. Why not? Because tomorrow we have to convince a stranger that our marriage is real, and if I admit how I actually feel, I won't be acting anymore. I'll just be telling the truth, and that terrifies me more than any audit. Julian's hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. The touch was gentle, deliberate, nothing like our practiced gestures from earlier. What if the truth is the only thing that'll convince them? He said softly. Then we're in trouble. We've been in trouble since City Hall. The rain continued its percussion against the windows, and I let myself lean into his touch for one moment. Just one. Tomorrow we'd perform our perfectly rehearsed love story. Tonight, I could admit that the performance had stopped being fake somewhere between the burnt stir-fry and the shared coffee, and the 1,000 small moments that had turned a paper marriage into something that felt permanent. Get some sleep, I whispered, pulling back before I did something we couldn't take back. We need to be convincing tomorrow. Elara, please, let me have tonight to pretend this is still just pretend. He nodded, understanding in his eyes that I wished he didn't have. We went to bed in our usual positions, him by the window, me by the door, 18 inches of mattress between us that might as well have been miles. But in the dark, I felt his hand reach across the space, fingers finding mine under the covers. He squeezed twice, our code, and I squeezed back. Trust me, it had always meant. But now it felt more like, I'm here, I'm real. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're in this together. I fell asleep holding his hand and woke up tangled together, his arm around my waist, my head on his chest. Neither of us mentioned it when the alarm went off. Some truths were safer left unspoken, at least until after the audit. The Havens conference room smelled like lemon polish and judgment. Janet Moreno sat across from us, a younger assistant beside her with a recording device and a laptop. Official, formal, the kind of setup that meant they'd done this before and found things worth investigating. Thank you for coming, Janet said, though we'd hardly had a choice. This should be straightforward, just a few questions to verify your application information. Julian's hand found mine under the table. Warm, steady, real. I squeezed back and tried to remember our rehearsed answers. First date, the bar, 3 years ago. I laughed at his bridge joke. Home isn't an address, it's a person. We could do this. We'd practiced. Let's start simple. How did you two meet? Sixth grade, I answered. I moved to Minnesota mid-year. Julian was assigned to show me around school. I got us lost trying to find the art room. She was drawing maps in her notebook instead of following the actual hallway signs, Julian added, his thumb brushing my knuckles. I thought she was either brilliant or completely impractical. Both, we said simultaneously, then shared a look that wasn't rehearsed, just true. Janet made a note. And when did the relationship become romantic? This was the scripted part. Julian's turn. It was gradual. We were friends for years, stayed close after we both moved to Portland for college. But about 3 years ago, Elara's birthday, we went to this bar called Sycamore and talked until they kicked us out. I realized I'd spent the whole night watching her instead of just talking to her. And you, Elara? When did you realize your feelings had changed? I hadn't prepared for this question directed specifically at me. Our script had Julian answering first, and I'd planned to just agree. But Janet was watching me with those sharp eyes, waiting for something spontaneous. I don't think I realized all at once, I said slowly, the truth slipping out easier than any lie. It was cumulative. The way he always remembered my coffee order, how he'd show up with soup when I was sick, the fact that he was the first person I wanted to tell about good news, and the only person I could be completely honest with about the bad. One day I looked at him and understood that he wasn't just my best friend. He was my person. Julian's grip on my hand tightened, and when I glanced at him, his expression was unreadable, but intense. Very poetic, Janet observed. So when did you decide to marry? After Elara got her eviction notice, Julian said. She was talking about leaving Portland, maybe going back to Minnesota. And I realized I couldn't let her go. Not like that. Not when we could make it work together. So it was a practical decision? It was survival, I cut in. But not just financial survival, emotional survival. I was drowning, and Julian threw me a lifeline. The fact that the lifeline came with a marriage license and a 2-year lease was just logistics. Romantic, the assistant muttered, not quite under her breath. Janet shot her a look. What about physical intimacy? Many couples who marry quickly struggle with that transition. My face went hot. This wasn't on any of Julian's lists. We'd prepared for questions about finances and future plans, not our sex life. We're taking it slow, Julian said, his voice remarkably even. We've been friends for 20 years. We want to get the foundation right. So you're not, Janet gestured vaguely. We're married, I said firmly. What we do in private is private. Fair enough, she made another note. Tell me about a recent conflict. How do you handle disagreements? Julian and I exchanged a glance. Yesterday's fight about the I love you practice felt too raw, too real. But what else did we have? Last week, I started carefully, Julian stayed up all night working on audit prep, lists and spreadsheets and contingency plans. I got frustrated because he was driving himself into exhaustion instead of just trusting that we'd be okay. And how did you resolve it? She made me sleep, Julian said, literally cornered me by the desk and refused to move until I agreed to rest. Then she held my hand until I fell asleep. That wasn't how I remembered it, but the way he was looking at me now, like I'd saved him rather than just nagged him, made my chest tight. You hold hands when you sleep? Janet asked. Sometimes, I admitted, when one of us is stressed. Who reaches out first? Depends on who needs it more. More notes, more scrutiny. Then Janet pulled out her phone, scrolling to something that made her expression sharpen. I looked up your social media. Neither of you has posted about your marriage. No announcement, no wedding photos, nothing. Why is that? My stomach dropped. We'd been so focused on the in-person performance that we'd never considered our digital footprint, or lack of one. We're private people, Julian said, and honestly, we got married so fast that telling our families was enough chaos. We haven't gotten around to broadcasting it. What did your families say? My parents are dead, Julian said flatly. My sister was surprised but supportive once she understood why we made the choice we did. Mine were less supportive, I added. They think I'm making another impractical decision. We haven't really talked since I told them. Janet studied us for a long moment. You understand why this all seems convenient? Best friends who suddenly marry right when they need housing? No public acknowledgement? Taking physical intimacy slowly? It reads like exactly the kind of arrangement we're supposed to be screening out. What do you want me to say? Julian's voice had an edge now. That we're madly in love and fuck every night and plaster it all over Instagram? We're two people trying to survive in a city that's actively pricing out anyone who doesn't make six figures. Yes, the timing was convenient. Yes, the marriage serves a practical purpose. But you asked if it's real, and I'm telling you it is. He stood, pulling me up with him, his hands still locked with mine. Elara is the most important person in my life. She has been since we were 12 years old. I would have married her eventually anyway. The eviction notice just accelerated the timeline. He looked at me, and there was something fierce and unguarded in his expression. You want proof? My proof is that I wake up every morning grateful I get to see her first thing. That I learn her routine like some people learn prayer. That the idea of losing her terrifies me more than losing this apartment, or my career, or anything else that's supposed to matter. The room went silent. The assistant had stopped typing. Janet was watching us with an expression I couldn't read. Mr. Pierce, she said slowly, please sit down. Julian sat, but he didn't let go of my hand. I couldn't feel my fingers from how hard he was gripping them. Janet closed her laptop. I'll be honest, when I came into this interview, I was 90% certain you two were committing fraud. The application had red flags. The timeline was suspicious. Everything felt too neat. My heart stopped. But, she continued, I've been doing these interviews for 3 years. I've seen couples who've been married for decades who can't answer basic questions about each other. I've seen newlyweds who flinch when they touch. I've seen every variation of real and fake. And you two, she shook her head. You're either the best actors I've ever met, or you're genuinely in love and just terrible at admitting it. So, Julian's voice was tight. So your application is approved. Welcome to the Haven. Try not to set off the smoke detectors with your cooking. It took a full 5 seconds for her words to register. Approved. We'd passed. We got to keep the apartment. Thank you, I managed. Don't thank me. Thank yourselves for being either very honest or very convincing. I'm still not entirely sure which. We left the conference room in a daze, made it to the elevator before either of us spoke. That was close, I breathed. That was real. I looked at him. What? Everything I said in there, it was real, Elara. The elevator doors opened on our floor, but neither of us moved. We stood in the hallway, still holding hands, the audit over, but the truth still hanging between us. Julian, you said tonight, after the audit, you'd let yourself stop pretending. I know what I said. So stop. He pulled me closer, and I could feel my careful control cracking. We'd passed the audit. We could go back to our safe arrangement now, our practiced distance. We could pretend the last month had been just that, pretending. Or we could walk through the door to our apartment and finally admit what had been true the whole time. If we do this, I whispered, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. His hand came up to cup my face, and this time I didn't pull away. This time I let myself lean in, let myself close the 18 inches of careful space we'd been maintaining since City Hall. We passed the audit, I said against his mouth. Fuck the audit. And then he was kissing me, really kissing me, not the practiced almost kiss from the courthouse, but the kind of kiss that 20 years of friendship and 1 month of forced intimacy and all those unspoken feelings had been building toward. We made it into the apartment, barely. The door wasn't even fully closed before I was pulling off his jacket, before his hands were in my hair, before we were stumbling toward the mattress that had been taunting us for weeks with its implications. "Tell me to stop," Julian breathed against my neck. "If this isn't what you want." I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "I've wanted this since you asked me to marry you. Maybe longer. Definitely longer. Rule number 1 was the stupidest rule we ever made." He laughed, and the sound was everything: relief and joy and heat. "I love you," he said, and this time it wasn't practice. "I love you, and I have for years, and I'm done pretending I don't." "I love you too, even though you make terrible spreadsheets and burn dinner and organize your books by color instead of author like a psychopath. Those are fighting words." "Then fight me." He did, with his mouth and his hands, and all the carefully controlled restraint finally breaking open into something wild and honest and real. We'd spent a month learning to live together. Now we were learning something else entirely. Later, tangled in sheets that smelled like both of us, Julian traced patterns on my bare shoulder. "So," he said, "where does this leave us with the arrangement? The arrangement where we stay married for 2 years and then amicably divorce?" "That one." I propped myself up to look at him. His hair was a mess, his mouth swollen from kissing, and he'd never looked more like home. "I think we might need to renegotiate the terms," I said. "What are you proposing?" "That we stay married, actually married, the real kind where we stop calling it an arrangement and start calling it what it is." "And what is it?" "A marriage. Our marriage. The one we apparently started years ago without realizing it." Julian pulled me down to kiss me again, slower this time, like we had all the time in the world. "I accept your terms, on one condition." "What condition?" "We burn that fucking contract." I laughed against his mouth. "Deal." We didn't burn it that night. We were too busy breaking every other rule we'd made about keeping distance and staying practical and definitely, absolutely not falling in love. Rule number 1 had been shattered, and it turned out we'd never been very good at following rules anyway. A knock interrupted our Saturday morning coffee, and Julian answered the door wearing my paint-stained flannel, the one I'd stolen from him weeks ago and he'd stolen back last night. "Riley!" His voice went bright with professional charm. "I didn't realize we had a meeting." I looked up from my tablet to see a woman in the doorway, red hair pulled back in a severe bun, portfolio case under one arm. She took in our apartment with sharp green eyes that lingered just a moment too long on the unmade bed visible from the entrance. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," Riley said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "Morrison asked me to grab your design revisions for the River District project. He said you'd have them ready?" "They're on my desk. Come in." She stepped inside, heels clicking on our hardwood, and I saw her catalog everything. The dishes in the sink from last night's dinner, my art supplies scattered across the coffee table, Julian's jacket thrown over the chair, mapping the domestic chaos that had developed over 6 weeks of actual living together. "You must be Elara," Riley said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you." I stood, suddenly aware I was wearing Julian's Henley and nothing else. "All good things, I hope." "Julian talks about you constantly. It's adorable." She smiled, but there was something sharp beneath it. "So this is the famous affordable housing everyone at the firm is gossiping about. Nice catch." "Riley," Julian's voice had a warning edge. "What? It's a compliment. You two played the system perfectly. Get married for the application, secure below-market rent, live like college roommates. Very pragmatic." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. I watched Julian's jaw tighten, saw him calculating how to respond without making things worse. "We didn't play anything," I said coolly. "We're married. We live here. What the firm gossips about isn't really our concern." "Of course." Riley's smile never wavered. "I'm sure the relationship is completely legitimate. It's just interesting timing, that's all. Julian was single for years. never mentioned being interested in anyone, and then suddenly he's married to his childhood friend right when the Haven applications opened. People fall in love, Julian said. He crossed the room to stand next to me, his hand finding my waist in a gesture that was pure instinct now. Sometimes it takes years to admit what was already there. Riley's eyes tracked the movement, the casual intimacy of how we fit together. I saw her recalculate, saw the moment she realized this wasn't just roommates playing house. "Well," she said after a pause, "Morrison will be happy to see your designs. He's been talking about bringing you on as junior partner for the Selwood project." "Junior partner?" Julian's surprise was genuine. He hasn't mentioned that. He wanted to see your River District work first. Make sure you're committed to staying in Portland long term. Her gaze flicked to me. "No offense, but there's been concern about your stability. The firm's heard about your previous living situations." I felt Julian tense beside me. "My living situations are none of the firm's business. They are when you're being considered for partnership. They need to know you're settled, that you're not going to bounce to Seattle or San Francisco if your circumstances change." "My circumstances did change," Julian said quietly. "I got married. I have a home. I'm not going anywhere." Riley collected the design folder from his desk, tucking it into her portfolio. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I hope it works out. I've seen too many friends try to turn practical arrangements into real relationships. It rarely ends well." After she left, silence filled the apartment like smoke after a fire. "That was fun," I said finally. Julian ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I didn't know people were talking, or that Morrison was considering partnership. The talking doesn't matter. The partnership does." She was out of line, implying we're not real. I turned to face him. "Julian, 6 weeks ago we weren't real. We were two desperate people signing a fraudulent marriage license. That's not what we are now." "I know, but she doesn't. The firm doesn't. How many other people are looking at us and doing the same math? Convenient timing plus fast marriage equals fraud. So what do we do?" I thought about the audit, about Janet's final comment that we were either excellent actors or genuinely in love, about how we'd pass that test but might face variations of it for years. "We live our lives," I said. "We stop caring what people think. We know the truth." "Which is?" I reached up to straighten the collar of my flannel that he was wearing, let my hand rest on his chest where I could feel his heart beating too fast. "That I'm in love with you. That this marriage is real, even if it started fake. That people can gossip all they want, but at the end of the day, I'm still going to be here, stealing your shirts and burning dinner and trying to figure out how to be a wife to my best friend." His hand covered mine. "That's all I need to know." "Good. Now go put on actual pants before your coworkers decide to drop by for any other surprise visits." He laughed, and the tension finally broke. "They're your pants now too, you know. Married people share everything." "Does that include your premium coffee stash?" "Don't push it." I watched him disappear into the bathroom, our bathroom, with its frosted glass that didn't hide anything anymore, and felt something settle in my chest. Let people gossip. Let them speculate. We knew what we were. Sometimes the best response to doubt was just living well. The envelope was thin, too thin. I stood in our kitchen holding my first major rejection in months. A children's book series I'd spent 6 weeks developing, killed by budget cuts. The email had been apologetic, standard lines that meant, try again later, maybe, probably not. Julian found me staring at my bank account, doing math that didn't work. Rent was covered, utilities were covered, but health insurance, groceries, student loans, I'd been counting on this contract. "L?" He read my face. "What happened?" "Lost the contract, budget cuts." "Fuck!" He crossed to me immediately. "What do you need?" "A time machine, or for art to actually pay living wages." His arms came around me from behind. This was the thing about being married to someone who'd known you 20 years. They saw through the flippancy to the fear. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. "I can make it through the month if I skip some meals." Option D, "Let me help." I tensed. That's not the deal. Separate finances. I remember the terms. But the terms were written by two people playing pretend. We're not those people anymore. "Julian, I can't." "You're not asking. I'm offering. We're married. Actually married. Which means when you're struggling, I help." "This isn't why I married you." "I know. You married me for the apartment and the spreadsheet, but that's not why I married you." He turned me around. "I married you because you're the best part of my day. Because I've been in love with you since we were 19. My eyes stung. "I hate needing help." "I know, but that's what marriage is. Taking turns being strong." Very profound. Did you find that on a coffee mug? Marriage Handbook, page 47. Despite everything, I smiled. "You're ridiculous." "I'm ridiculous. You married me, remember?" He kissed my forehead, soft and sweet. "Okay," I said. "Help me, for now." "Deal. But when the next contract comes in, you're buying the expensive coffee." Always about the coffee with you. We stood in our too small kitchen, figuring it out together. And for the first time since opening that rejection email, I thought maybe this would be okay. Marriage, it turned out, was less about grand gestures and more about letting someone help carry the weight. 8 weeks into our marriage, we developed our rhythm. Julian left for work at 7:30, always kissing my forehead before he left. I worked mornings on illustrations. He'd text around noon, coffee reminders, photos of terrible architectural decisions downtown. Evenings, we'd cook, or attempt to cook. We'd gotten marginally better, though pizza still featured heavily. We'd talk about our days, his firm drama, my difficult clients, the mundane details that became interesting when shared with the right person. And we'd sleep tangled together, because 18 inches of space had become unbearable once we'd admitted the truth. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked one Saturday morning, both of us still in bed while rain drummed against the windows. "How weird this is." "Good weird or bad weird?" "I don't know yet." His hand found mine under the covers. "We have a follow-up audit in 2 months. Think we can still pass?" "I think we could fail on purpose and still look more married than half the building." "That's very romantic." He kissed me, slow and thorough. When we broke apart, I stayed close. "Julian?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for the really compelling spreadsheet." He laughed. "Best spreadsheet I ever made." We stayed in bed until noon, being uselessly happy in a way that would have terrified me 3 months ago. But somewhere between the eviction notice and the audit, and all the small moments in between, I'd stopped running. Turned out, home wasn't a place you found. It was a person you chose. The truth came out on a Tuesday. Julian sat at his desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice tight with controlled anger. I was halfway through breakfast, watching him through the kitchen pass-through, when I heard him say, "So you've known about the partnership for 6 weeks, and you're only telling me now that it's conditional on relocating to Seattle?" My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "I understand it's a significant opportunity," Julian continued, his architect voice in full force. "But that's information that should have been disclosed earlier. I'm married. I have a lease. I have commitments." A pause. His jaw clenched. "No, I haven't discussed it with my wife yet, because I didn't know it was a discussion we needed to have." He hung up, sat motionless at his desk for a long moment. Then he turned to find me staring at him from the kitchen. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough. Seattle?" "Apparently, Morrison's opening a second office. They want me to head the landscape division. But it's not remote. It's full relocation." I set down my coffee very carefully. "When do they need an answer?" 2 weeks. That's fast. That's Morrison. Everything's a test of commitment. We looked at each other across the apartment, and I could see him doing the same calculation I was. The Haven's lease had a 2-year commitment. Breaking it meant penalties, fees, potentially blacklisting from subsidized housing programs. But more than that, we'd built something here, in this space, in this city. It's your career, I said carefully. It's our life. Julian, don't do that. Don't make this my decision like you're not part of the equation. I'm always part of the equation. That's the problem. I stood up, needing to move. This is exactly what I was afraid of, that you'd get this opportunity and I'd be the anchor holding you back. You're not an anchor. You're the reason I want to stay. Which is worse. You should want the partnership. You should want to advance your career. But instead you're thinking about a lease and a wife who can barely pay her half of the utilities some months. Stop, he crossed to me in 3 strides. Stop making this about your worth. This isn't about money or leases or any of the practical bullshit we keep hiding behind. Then what's it about? It's about whether we want the same future, whether we're building something together or just parallel lives that happen to share an address. The question hung between us, sharp and unavoidable. I'd been so focused on making it through each day, each month, proving we could make the marriage work, that I'd never thought about what working meant. What it looked like in 5 years, 10 years, when the lease ended and we had to actively choose each other instead of being bound by contracts. I don't want you to give up your dream for me, I whispered. What if you're my dream? That's not fair. Why not? Because dreams aren't supposed to be people. They're supposed to be careers and achievements and things you can control. People leave. People change. Are you planning on leaving? The question stopped me cold. What? You keep talking like this is temporary, like I'm going to wake up one day and realize I made a mistake marrying you, like you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. He cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. I'm not leaving. I'm not changing my mind. I chose you at City Hall, and I'm choosing you now. And I'll choose you in Seattle or Portland or wherever else life takes us. But I need to know you're choosing me back. Tears burned hot down my face. I'm scared. Of what? That if you stay, you'll resent me. That if you go, we'll fall apart. That no matter what we choose, I'll lose you. You're not going to lose me. His thumbs brushed away my tears. But we have to make this decision together, as partners. Not as two people constantly afraid of being too much or not enough. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out. He pulled me against his chest, and I felt his heart racing as fast as mine. Talk to me. What do you want? What did I want? I'd spent so long trying not to want anything too much, afraid that wanting would turn into needing, and needing would turn into losing. But standing here in Julian's arms, in our apartment, in the life we'd accidentally built together, I finally let myself be honest. I want you to take the partnership, I said into his shirt. I want you to have the career you've worked for, but I want to come with you. I want us to figure out Seattle together. He pulled back to look at me. What about the Haven, the lease? We'll break it, pay the penalty, find a new place in Seattle. I laughed, shaky and terrified. Apparently I'm better at temporary than I thought. I've just been temporary with the wrong things. Maybe it's time to be permanent about the right ones. Are you sure? No, but I'm sure about you, about us. The rest we'll figure out. Julian kissed me hard, desperate, like I'd just given him permission to breathe. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. Seattle, he said. Fuck. We'll need a new apartment, new coffee shops, new pizza places for when we burn dinner. It won't have the Haven subsidies. Rent will be higher. Then I'll take on more commercial work. We'll make it work. Together. Together. We stood in our kitchen, soon to be our former kitchen, holding each other while the rain started again outside. The Haven had given us a home when we'd needed it most. But home wasn't the address. It wasn't the subsidized rent or the perfect light or even the city itself. Home was the person whose heartbeat I could feel against my cheek. The person who'd married me for a lease and stayed for love. The person I was finally brave enough to follow anywhere. 2 weeks, Julian said. We'll tell Janet, pack up, find a place in Seattle. Easy. Define easy. Relatively less catastrophic than our last move. That bar is very low. Then we'll definitely clear it. I laughed despite the fear still circling in my chest. Okay, Seattle, let's do this. You're sure? I pulled back to look at him, really look at him. This man who'd been my best friend for 20 years, and my husband for 8 weeks, and my home for all of it. I'm terrified, I admitted, but I'm sure about you, so yeah, let's go to Seattle and figure out the rest. He smiled, and it was everything. Relief and love, and the particular joy of knowing someone was choosing you, even when it was scary. Best partnership decision I ever made. Better than the spreadsheet? Way better than the spreadsheet. We had 2 weeks to dismantle the life we'd built and start over in a new city. 2 weeks to prove that the paper marriage that had started as fraud could survive outside the apartment that had forced us together. I should have been panicking. Instead, I felt something close to peace. Because home wasn't staying in one place anymore. Home was the person holding my hand while we figured out the next impossible thing together. And that was something I could finally let myself keep. The boxes arrived on Thursday, flat-packed cardboard that smelled like warehouse dust and new beginnings. I stood in the middle of our apartment, surrounded by the life we'd built in 8 weeks, and tried to figure out how to disassemble it without breaking what mattered. Julian was at work, negotiating his exit from Morrison with a kind of careful diplomacy that kept bridges from burning. I'd volunteered to start packing, thinking it would be easier alone. I was wrong. Every object had become weighted with meaning I hadn't noticed accumulating. The coffee mugs we'd bought at Target, his precise, mine impulsive. The throw blanket we'd fought over and then shared. The wedding photo in its cheap frame that had started as a prop and become something true. My hands found a pen, started sketching on the side of a box. Spirals. Boxes with no doors. The nervous habit that had covered margins since childhood, now marking our departure. You're catastrophizing, I said to the empty apartment, my voice strange in the space that would soon belong to someone else. This is good. This is what people do. They move, they grow, they follow each other to new cities. But people who move usually had more than 8 weeks of actual marriage under their belts. People who moved usually weren't still figuring out the difference between playing house and building a home. My phone buzzed. Julian's name with a photo I'd taken last week, him laughing at something I'd said, his face open in a way he never was with anyone else. How's the packing? Existential. You? Morrison's being difficult. Might be late. Sorry. It's fine. Take your time. I'll label things. I set down the phone and picked up a marker, started writing on boxes in my chaotic handwriting. Kitchen, books, art supplies, marriage documents. That last one was a joke, but also not. We had a file folder now. Tax forms, lease agreements, the contract we'd never burned, kept as evidence of how far we'd come from those original terms. The door opened. Not Julian, too early, wrong rhythm of footsteps. I turned to find Janet Moreno standing in our doorway, her expression unreadable. I knocked, she said. You didn't answer. Sorry, I gestured helplessly at the boxes, the chaos, the visible evidence that we were leaving. Distracted. Janet stepped inside, her eyes cataloging everything with that sharp attention that had nearly exposed us 2 months ago. Julian called, said you were breaking the lease. Yes, his job. I know about the job. Seattle. Partnership. Very impressive. She picked up our wedding photo, studied it. I also know what breaking this lease cost you. penalty fees, forfeited deposits, potential impact on future housing applications. My chest tightened. We're aware of the terms. Are you aware that the Haven has a relocation clause? I blinked. A what? Section 12, subsection C. If a resident receives a job transfer more than 50 miles away within the first year of tenancy, they can terminate the lease without penalty, provided they give 30 days notice and proof of employment. The words took a moment to register. No penalty. We could leave without the financial devastation we'd been bracing for. I don't understand, I said slowly. Why are you telling me this? Janet set down the photo, turned to face me fully. Because 2 months ago I thought you were committing fraud. Now I think you're two people who accidentally fell in love while trying to survive. And I'd like to believe that still counts for something. Tears burned behind my eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me, just make it work, wherever you end up. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you're still this happy when you're not forced to live in 400 square feet together. After she left, I stood alone in our apartment and let myself cry. Relief, gratitude, terror about whether Janet was right, whether we could survive without the pressure that had forged us into something real. My phone buzzed again. Julian. On my way home, bringing dinner, Thai or Italian? Thai. Extra spring rolls, you're stress eating, what happened? Good things. Tell you when you get here. I looked around at the half-packed boxes, at the apartment that had trapped us into honesty, and started labeling with new purpose. We were leaving, but we were leaving together. And somehow, that made all the difference. The evening light turned our apartment golden, catching dust motes that danced through the air like they were celebrating our departure. Julian sat on the floor next to me, both of us surrounded by bubble wrap and packing tape, attempting to box up his architecture books in some kind of logical order. You can't pack books by color, I said, watching him arrange spines by their design. I'm packing them by visual appeal for unpacking. That's not a system. Everything's a system if you commit to it. He held up a green spine volume. This goes with these two. They'll look good on the shelf together. You're insane. You married me. I threw a wad of bubble wrap at his head. He caught it, grinning, and the gesture was so normal, so us, that something in my chest loosened. We could do this. We could pack up and move and still be the people who threw bubble wrap and argued about book organization. Elle? His voice went quieter. Are you really okay with this? Seattle? Are you asking because you want reassurance or because you're having doubts? Both. Neither. I don't know. He set down the book, ran his hand through his hair. I keep thinking about what you said, that I might resent you if I stayed. What if you resent me for making you leave? I crawled across the floor to him, settling between his legs, my back against his chest. His arms came around me automatically, and I laced my fingers through his. I'm scared, I admitted. I'm terrified, actually, but not about leaving Portland, about whether we can survive without. I gestured at the apartment around us. The forced proximity? The excuse. We could hide behind the lease, the audit, the performance. In Seattle, we're just us. What if that's not enough? Julian's chin rested on top of my head, and I felt him take a long breath. Then we figure it out, together, same way we figured out everything else. Very romantic. Is that from the marriage handbook? Page 73, right after the chapter on book organization. I smiled despite myself, turning to look at him. His face was close, familiar, home in a way that had nothing to do with addresses. I love you, I said, even though you're going to make our Seattle apartment look like a rainbow threw up. I love you too, even though you're going to cover every surface with chaotic sketches. That's just good decorating. He kissed me, soft and slow, the kind of kiss that said we had time now. No more rushing, no more pretending, just the long stretch of future ahead of us to figure out how to be married for real. Tie's getting cold, he murmured against my mouth. Good, I hate it hot anyway. Liar. We ate cold pad thai on the floor, surrounded by boxes, planning our Seattle apartment like architects, where my desk would go for best light, how to arrange his books, by subject, finally a compromise, whether we needed actual furniture or could survive on IKEA basics. We should get a couch, Julian said. A real one, not the cheapest thing at the store. We should get dishes that match. Revolutionary. We're going to be so adult in Seattle. We're going to fail spectacularly and order pizza 3 times a week. That's very realistic of you. His hand found mine across the takeout containers. I'm just trying to manage expectations. But when I looked at him, I saw hope instead of fear. We were leaving the haven, but we were taking the best parts with us. The honesty we'd learned, the intimacy we'd built, the marriage that had started fake and become the realest thing either of us had. The call came at 2 a.m. on our last Friday in Portland. I woke to Julian's phone vibrating on the nightstand, his name illuminated in the darkness. He grabbed it, groggy and confused, and I heard a woman's voice on the other end, panicked, young, crying. Slow down, Julian said, sitting up. Sarah, I can't understand you. What happened? Sarah, his sister, the one who lived in Minnesota with their aunt, the one who'd been surprised but supportive when we'd told her about the marriage. When? Julian's voice went sharp. Is she? Okay, I'll figure it out. Just stay with her. He hung up, staring at the phone like it might explode. Julian? I touched his shoulder. What happened? My aunt. She fell, broke her hip. Sarah's at the hospital with her now, but... He trailed off, running his hand over his face. She needs surgery. Recovery's going to be months. Sarah can't do it alone. She's only 19. The implications settled over us like weight. Sarah was in college. Their aunt was elderly, had been their guardian after their parents died, and Julian was about to move 2,000 miles away to start a new job in 3 days. We should go, I said immediately. Minnesota. Help Sarah figure out care. Make sure your aunt's okay. I start Monday. Morrison already pushed back my start date once. If I delay again, then you delay again. Family comes first. That's going to cost us. The hotel, the flights, all of it right when we're supposed to be moving. Julian, I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. Your sister is 19 and scared and alone. Your aunt raised you after your dad left. We go. The rest we figure out. I watched him war with himself, the responsible part that had spent years being the reliable one, the practical part that had built spreadsheets and contingency plans, fighting against the part that knew I was right. Okay, he said finally. We go, but just for a few days. Make sure Sarah has support. Help set up home care, then we come back and move. Deal. We booked flights at 3 a.m., called Morrison at 8 to explain the delay, threw clothes in bags while trying to simultaneously pack our apartment. By noon, we were on a plane to Minneapolis, holding hands through the turbulence, both of us exhausted and terrified in different ways. Thank you, Julian said quietly, for not making me choose. You don't thank someone for being a partner, that's just the job description. Still, thank you. I leaned my head on his shoulder and tried not to think about the Seattle apartment we'd secured, the start date we were jeopardizing, the careful plans that were unraveling in real time. This was marriage, I was learning, not the version from our contract with its neat boundaries and rules, the messy version where someone's emergency became your emergency, where we replaced I without asking permission first. The plane descended through clouds, and I watched Minnesota appear below, flat and familiar, and full of Julian's past. We were supposed to be moving forward. Instead, we were going back. I squeezed his hand. He squeezed back twice. Our code. Trust me. But this time it meant, trust us. Trust that we can handle detours. Trust that marriage isn't a straight line. We'd figure it out. We always did. Even when the plan fell apart. Especially then. The hospital smell hit me first. Antiseptic and anxiety, and the particular despair of fluorescent lighting at midnight. Sarah sat in the waiting room looking impossibly young, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, Julian's eyes staring out from a face that hadn't quite lost its teenage softness. "Jules." She stood when she saw us, and Julian pulled her into a hug that looked like he was trying to hold her together. "They said surgery went okay. She's in recovery now. But they're saying 6 weeks minimum before she can go home, and even then, she'll need full-time care." "We'll figure it out," Julian said, the same words I'd used on him, passed down like currency. "Is she awake?" "Not yet. They said maybe in an hour." I stood back, letting them have their moment, suddenly aware that I was the outsider here. The wife Julian had acquired 8 weeks ago, showing up to a family crisis I had no real claim to. Sarah kept glancing at me like she was trying to figure out if I was real or just another stress hallucination. "Sarah, this is Elara," Julian said finally. "My wife. Elle, this is Sarah." "I know who she is." Sarah's tone wasn't hostile, just assessing. "You're the childhood friend who married him for the apartment." The bluntness was so unexpected I almost laughed. "That's the simplified version, yes. Is there a complicated version?" "Sarah," Julian's voice had a warning edge. "What? You called me crying 2 months ago, saying you're married to your best friend because you needed to game the housing system. Now she's here at 2 a.m. in Minnesota, helping with Aunt Claire. I'm just trying to understand what changed." I looked at Julian, saw him struggling to explain something that didn't fit into neat boxes. So I did it for him. "I fell in love with your brother," I said simply, "and he fell in love with me. The apartment was just the excuse we needed to finally admit it." Sarah studied me for a long moment. Then, "Good. He's been half in love with you since he was 19. It's about time you caught up." Julian choked. "What?" "Please, you talked about her constantly. Elara did this amazing illustration. Elara's moving again. Elara and I got drunk and talked about art theory until dawn. It was pathetic." "I was not pathetic. You were extremely pathetic." Sarah turned to me. "Did he do the spreadsheet thing when he proposed?" "There was a detailed cost-benefit analysis," I confirmed. "Oh my God, that's so on brand it hurts." But she was smiling now, some of the tension bleeding out. "Okay, you can stay, but if you hurt him, I know where you live." "You really don't. We're moving to Seattle." "Then I'll learn where you live." Point stands. A nurse appeared, calling for the family of Claire Pierce. We all stood, and I started to hang back, but Julian's hand found mine, pulled me forward. "Your family," he said quietly, "if that's okay with you." Family. I'd spent years avoiding that word, terrified of what it required. But standing in this sterile hospital with Julian's hand in mine and his sister's suspicious approval, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like the thing I'd been running from and toward all along. "Okay," I whispered. "Family." We went to see Claire together, and I tried not to think about the Seattle apartment waiting for us. The job starting without Julian, the life we'd planned that was already mutating into something unrecognizable. Marriage, I was learning, was less about the plan and more about who you wanted standing next to you when everything went wrong. 3 days in Minnesota turned into 6, then 8. The Seattle apartment sat empty. Julian's start date came and went with apologetic phone calls and promises of, "Next week, I swear." Morrison was patient, then less patient, then threatening to rescind the offer entirely. I found Julian on the porch of his aunt's house at dawn on day 9, laptop open, his face illuminated by the blue light of too many emails. "Morrison?" I asked, sitting next to him with 2 mugs of coffee. "Giving me until Friday. If I'm not there by Monday, they're moving on." He took the coffee, wrapped both hands around it like he was trying to absorb warmth. "Sarah found a care facility, but Claire hates it. She wants to be home, but home requires modifications, ramps, grab bars, a hospital bed, and even with insurance, we're looking at $20,000 minimum. $20,000, which I don't have, because I spent my savings securing the Seattle apartment and breaking the Haven lease. Even with Janet's waiver, there were costs. The irony was brutal. We'd escaped one financial crisis only to land in another. I thought about my bank account, the rejection from last month, the modest payment from my current contract. Nowhere near enough to make a difference. "What if you don't go?" I said quietly. Julian looked at me. "What?" "To Seattle. What if you stay here, help Sarah set up Claire's care, find a job in Minneapolis, and throw away the partnership? Everything we planned?" "Plans change. Family needs you." "You need me." His voice was rough. "We just started figuring out how to actually be married. Now you're suggesting we what? Live apart while I play caretaker in Minnesota? I'm suggesting you do what you need to do. I'll survive." That's not the same as thriving. The coffee had gone cold in my hands. Dawn was breaking over the flat Minnesota landscape, turning everything gold and sharp. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. We were supposed to move to Seattle, prove our marriage could survive outside the Haven's forced proximity, build something permanent. Instead, we were watching our plans disintegrate in real time. "I don't know what to do," Julian admitted. "Take the job and abandon Sarah? Stay and lose the career I've worked for? There's no right answer." "Then pick the least wrong one." "Which is?" I thought about rule number one, about the contract we'd written in desperation, about how every plan we'd made had been upended by reality. Maybe that was the point. Maybe marriage wasn't about having the right plan. It was about choosing each other even when the plan fell apart. "You stay," I said. "Help Sarah. I'll go to Seattle, set up the apartment, work remotely. You join me when you can." "That's not..." "It's temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month. Just until Claire's settled and Sarah has support systems in place." "You're talking about starting over in a new city alone." "I'm talking about being a partner to someone whose family needs him. That's the job." Julian's hand found mine, and I felt him trembling. Not from cold, from the weight of impossible choices. "I love you," he said. "I don't tell you that enough. You tell me constantly. Not in words. Words are overrated. You show me every day." He pulled me against him, and we sat on that porch watching Minnesota wake up, both of us pretending we weren't terrified of what came next. Long-distance newlyweds, separated by choice, testing whether the marriage that had been forged in proximity could survive in distance. "Friday," he said finally. "You fly to Seattle, I stay here. We figure out the rest. Together. Even when we're apart." It wasn't the plan. It wasn't even close. But as I leaned into Julian's warmth and watched the sunrise over his childhood home, I thought maybe this was what marriage actually looked like. Not the fairy tale, or the rom-com, or the neat, happily ever after. Just two people choosing each other, over and over, even when it was hard, especially then. The Seattle apartment was smaller than I remembered from the virtual tour. Fifth-floor walk-up in Capitol Hill, one bedroom with exposed brick, and a kitchen that could maybe fit one person comfortably. The light was good, though. East-facing windows that would be perfect for drawing. I stood in the empty space surrounded by our boxes, shipped ahead, delivered while I was in Minnesota, and tried to figure out how to make this feel like home without Julian here to help. My phone buzzed. FaceTime from Julian, his face pixelated and tired on my screen. "You made it," he said. "I made it. The apartment is cozy." Cozy meaning tiny? Cozy meaning we'll definitely bump into each other in the kitchen. "When you get here." A pause. We both heard the unspoken question. When was that, exactly? Claire's recovery was slower than expected. Sarah was struggling. Julian had found a temp job at a local firm to cover expenses. Every week, the timeline pushed further. "I miss you," he said quietly. "I miss you too." I turned the phone so he could see the space. "Where should your desk go?" "By the window. You take the bedroom for your studio." "That's not fair. You need workspace too." "We'll figure it out when I get there." When, not if. I held on to that distinction like a lifeline. "How's the Morrison job?" he asked. "I don't have it yet. Interview is tomorrow." "What?" I emailed them, explained the situation, asked if they'd consider me instead. Part-time remote illustration for their marketing materials. "It's not landscape architecture, but it's income until you can join me." Julian's expression did something complicated. "Elara, you don't have to." "I want to. We're a team, remember? You support Sarah, I support us. We make it work." "What about your children's book contracts?" "I can do both. I'm very talented and also desperate." I tried to smile. "Besides, someone has to make sure we can afford this tiny apartment until you get here." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I don't deserve you. You're stuck with me, legal contract and everything. Best contract I ever signed." We talked until his phone battery died, and then I was alone in the Seattle apartment with boxes to unpack and a marriage to maintain across 2,000 miles. I put Julian's books on the shelf by the window, by color, the way he liked, because I was petty and also in love. I hung the wedding photo from City Hall on the wall. I made the bed with sheets that smelled like both of us, and then I sat on the floor and cried, because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. But maybe that was okay. Maybe marriage wasn't about the plan. Maybe it was about showing up anyway, even when you were terrified, even when you were alone, especially then. The call came at 3 a.m. Seattle time, midnight in Minnesota. I grabbed my phone, heart racing, expecting bad news about Claire. Instead, I heard Julian's voice, rough and broken. "Elle, I need you to talk me down." "What happened?" "Morrison called. They're officially rescinding the offer. Gave the partnership to Riley instead. Said they can't wait anymore, that my unreliable personal situation makes me a liability." I sat up in bed, our bed, though he'd never slept in it. "Fuck them." That's not helpful. It's accurate, though. I turned on the light, needing to see his face on the screen. He looked wrecked, hair everywhere, eyes red, sitting in what I recognize as Claire's basement. "Jules, they didn't deserve you anyway." They were my shot, my chance to finally do something that mattered. "You're doing something that matters. You're taking care of your family." "I'm failing at taking care of anyone." His voice cracked. "Sarah's overwhelmed. Claire's depressed. You're alone in Seattle working a job you don't even want. And I'm here, stuck, watching every plan we made turn to ash." Stop catastrophizing." "This isn't catastrophizing. This is just facts." I climbed out of bed, started pacing the small apartment with my phone, trying to figure out how to reach through the screen and hold him together. "Listen to me. You haven't failed. You made an impossible choice, and you're living with the consequences. That's not failure, that's just being human. Being human sucks." "Yeah, it does." I looked around the apartment, his books on the shelf, his side of the bed still pristine, the space waiting for him to fill it. "But we're going to figure this out. You're going to find another job, a better one that doesn't make you choose between career and family." "In Minneapolis? Elle, there's nothing here. That's why I left in the first place." "Then we reassess. Maybe I move back to Minnesota." "No, you're finally stable, finally building your career. I'm not asking you to give that up." "You're not asking, I'm offering." "It's the same thing." We stared at each other through our screens, 2,000 miles apart, both of us exhausted and scared and not sure how to fix this. The silence stretched until Julian finally spoke. "What if we made a mistake?" he said quietly. "Getting married, moving, all of it. My heart stopped. Do you believe that? I don't know. I don't know anything anymore except that I miss you, and I'm failing, and I can't see a way forward that doesn't involve someone losing. Then we both lose together. That's the deal. That's not fair to you. Neither is quitting on us because things got hard. His eyes closed. When he opened them again, they were wet. I'm not quitting, I don't know how to do this. How to be enough for everyone who needs me. You don't have to be. That's why you have me. That's why we're a team. I sat down on the floor, my back against our bed. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to find a job in Minneapolis. Anything. Just to get income flowing. I'm going to keep working the Morrison contract remotely. We'll save money. And when Claire's stable and Sarah's okay, you'll come to Seattle and we'll start over. Together. That could be months. Then it's months. We survived long distance before we were even dating. We can survive it now. That's different. Why? Because now I know what I'm missing. The pain in his voice was physical. I wanted to reach through the phone and hold him. Instead, I did the only thing I could. I stayed on the line until his breathing evened out, until the panic faded, until he believed me when I said we'd survive this. Get some sleep, I whispered. We'll talk tomorrow when you're less disaster-brained. I love you. I love you too, even when you're catastrophizing. Especially when I'm catastrophizing? Especially then. He smiled, small and tired, and disconnected. I sat alone on the floor of our empty apartment and let myself feel the weight of it. The distance, the uncertainty. The marriage that was supposed to be stable now turned fragile by circumstance. But we'd survived worse. We'd survived the haven and audits and pretending. We could survive this too. We just had to keep choosing each other. Even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. 6 weeks apart turned into 8, then 10. We fell into a rhythm, morning texts, evening FaceTime calls, constant messages throughout the day like breadcrumbs keeping us connected. Julian found work at a small firm in Minneapolis doing residential landscape design. It wasn't prestigious, but it paid enough. Claire moved back home with modifications installed. Sarah adjusted to her new role as caregiver. Everything was working, sort of. And I was alone in Seattle learning how to be married to someone I couldn't touch. The Morrison contract turned into a full-time remote position. I took over their entire visual marketing department from my laptop, working from coffee shops, in the apartment, and anywhere with Wi-Fi. The money was good, the work was fine, but it wasn't mine. I started drawing again at night, real drawing, not commercial work. Illustrations of two people in different cities, connected by thin lines like red string theory. Stories about distance and proximity and what it meant to be home. "What are you working on?" Julian asked during one of our calls. He looked tired, but better. The crisis mode had faded into something more sustainable. "A picture book, about a girl who builds homes out of clouds." "Isn't that the one from before, when you got evicted?" Same premise, different execution. This time she learns that home isn't a place, it's a person you choose. I showed him the sketches, rough, emotional, nothing like my usual polished work. "I think it might be good. It's beautiful." His voice went soft. "Elle, have you thought about pitching it to publishers while working full-time for Morrison? You could quit Morrison." I blinked. "What?" "The job was always supposed to be temporary, a stopgap until I got there. But maybe," he trailed off thinking, "what if you quit and focused on your actual career, your books, your art?" That's a huge risk. You're in Seattle, I'm in Minneapolis. We're already living risks. He leaned closer to the camera. How long are we going to put our real lives on hold waiting for circumstances to be perfect? That's very philosophical for midnight. I'm serious. What do you want, Elle? Not what's practical, not what makes sense. What do you actually want? I looked around the apartment, our space that Julian had never seen in person. the life I'd built alone while waiting for him to join me. What did I want? I want to write and illustrate books that matter. I want you here. I want us to stop living in holding patterns and actually build something. Then do it. Quit Morrison. Write your book. I'll figure out my end. Jules, trust me. Our code. The words that had carried us through 20 years of friendship and 3 months of marriage and 10 weeks of separation. I wanted to argue, to point out all the practical reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, I found myself nodding. Okay, I'll quit. I'll write the book. And I'll come home. To Seattle? To you, wherever you are. We stayed on the call until dawn broke in both time zones, planning the future like architects, careful and detailed and full of hope. When we finally disconnected, I pulled out my tablet and started drawing for real. A girl who built homes from clouds, and a boy who learned that home was her. It was the truest thing I'd ever written. Julian arrived on a Tuesday. I got the text at noon. Flight lands at 4. Don't freak out. I freaked out immediately. He was supposed to have 2 more weeks in Minneapolis. Claire was barely stable. Sarah was still adjusting. What changed? What happened? I typed back. Nothing bad. Tell you when I land. Meet me at the apartment? 4 hours. I had 4 hours to make the space presentable, to figure out how to greet my husband I hadn't seen in person for 2.5 months, to remember how to be married without a screen between us. I cleaned frantically, made the bed, changed clothes 3 times, put on the navy Henley he'd left behind, the one I'd been sleeping in, then changed again because that felt too desperate. Then changed back because, fuck it, desperate was honest. The knock came at 4:47. I opened the door to find Julian standing there with a duffel bag and an expression I couldn't quite read. Tired, determined, home. Hi, he said. Hi. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then I was pulling him inside, wrapping my arms around him, breathing in the cedar soap smell that FaceTime couldn't capture. He dropped his bag and held me like I might disappear. You're here, I said against his chest. You're actually here. I'm here. But Claire is stable. Sarah hired a home health aide. They're managing. He pulled back to look at me. I couldn't do it anymore, Elle. Being apart, waiting for the perfect time. So I stopped waiting. You just left? I gave notice at the firm, packed my stuff, got on a plane. His hands came up to cup my face. I quit playing it safe and came home. My eyes burned. This is home? This tiny apartment you've never even slept in? You're home. The apartment's just where you currently are. I kissed him hard, desperate. 3 months of missing him condensed into one moment of finally having him back. He tasted like airplane coffee and relief. And when we broke apart, we were both crying and laughing and holding each other like we'd survived something. I have news too, I managed. I quit Morrison. I'm writing the Cloud House book full time. You actually did it? You told me to trust you, so I did. Julian laughed, the sound bright and real in our small space. We're both unemployed in an expensive city with no plan. That's very us. Extremely us. I love it. You're insane. I'm yours. We spent the rest of the afternoon just existing together, showing him the apartment properly, unpacking his duffel, arguing about where his desk should go. By the window, final answer. He made dinner. I made coffee. We moved around each other in the tiny kitchen with the ease of people who'd learned choreography through separation. This is weird, Julian said as we ate pasta on the floor, because we still didn't have a proper table. Good weird or bad weird? Different weird. We spent 8 weeks at the Haven learning to live together. Now we have to learn again. Think we can do it? He reached over and laced his fingers through mine. We survived fake marriage, real marriage, long distance, family crisis, and my terrible cooking. I think we can survive anything. That's very optimistic. That's marriage. I leaned into him, both of us sitting on our floor, in our tiny apartment, in our imperfect life, and felt something settle. This was it. Not the plan we'd started with, not the neat progression we'd imagined. Just us, choosing each other, figuring it out as we went. "Welcome home," I whispered. "Welcome home, wife." And somehow, finally, we were. The email came 3 months later, subject line, "Offer of publication." I stared at my laptop screen in the coffee shop, reading the words over and over until they became real. A publisher wanted my Cloud House book. Not just wanted, loved. They were offering an advance that would cover 6 months of rent. They wanted to fast-track publication for next fall. My phone was already in my hand, calling Julian. "Elle?" He answered on the first ring, his voice warm with afternoon. "What's up?" "They said yes." A pause. Then, "The publisher? They want the book. They love the book. They're offering—" I had to stop, overwhelmed. "Jules, they're offering enough that we can breathe for a while." Oh my God. I heard him moving, probably stepping away from whatever he was working on. "Elle, that's incredible. When did you find out?" "Literally just now. I'm at the coffee shop reading the email and trying not to cry in public." "Cry. Let them think you're having a breakdown. You earned this." I laughed, shaky and overwhelmed. "How's the interview?" "Promising. They seem interested." He'd been interviewing all week at various Seattle firms, trying to find something that fit. "But that's not important right now. Your book is getting published. We're celebrating. It's 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Then we're celebrating inappropriately early. I'm coming to get you." He hung up before I could argue. I sat in the coffee shop with my laptop and my coffee and my completely impractical, beautiful career choice, and let myself feel it. The months of fear and risk in choosing the uncertain path, they'd led here. Julian appeared 20 minutes later, slightly breathless, looking at me like I'd hung the moon. "Show me the email," he demanded. I turned my laptop. He read it carefully, his architect's focus tracking every detail. And then he was pulling me up, spinning me around in the middle of the crowded coffee shop while other patrons stared. "You did it," he said. "You actually fucking did it." "We did it. You're the one who told me to quit and take the risk. You're the one who had the courage to actually do it." We left the coffee shop hand in hand, walking through Seattle in the late afternoon light, talking about the future like it was something we could hold. His interview had gone well. They wanted him for a junior designer role focusing on green spaces. Not a partnership, but a start. We'd make it work. "I have something to show you," Julian said as we walked. "A surprise." "I don't like your surprises. They involve spreadsheets. This one involves location scouting." He led me through Capitol Hill, past our apartment building, to a small park I'd never noticed before. It was mostly empty, just a few dog walkers and parents with strollers. But Julian walked me to the far corner where someone had built a community garden. "They're looking for volunteers," he said, "to help design and maintain it. I thought—" He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "I thought maybe we could do it together. Your illustrations for the signage, my landscape expertise, make something that's ours." I looked at the garden beds, the scattered tools, the potential waiting to be shaped. It wasn't prestigious, it wasn't paid, but it was exactly the kind of thing we'd talked about during those late-night calls. Building something that mattered, even if it was small. "Yes," I said, "let's do it." Julian smiled, relieved and bright. "We're building a life together. A weird, impractical, beautiful life. The best kind." We stood in that small park as the sun set over Seattle. Two people who'd accidentally gotten married and somehow made it real. Our apartment was tiny. Our careers were uncertain. We had no idea what came next. But we had each other. And we had the courage to keep choosing each other. Even when it was scary. Even when it was hard. Especially when the future was unclear. "Elle?" Julian's voice was soft. Yeah? I'm glad we signed that stupid contract. Me too. Even though we broke every rule, especially because we broke every rule. He kissed me there in the community garden as the light turned golden, and I thought about the eviction notice that had started everything. About the haven with its frosted glass bathroom and single mattress. About the spreadsheet marriage that had become the realest thing in my life. We'd started as a survival strategy, ended up as partners, built a home that had nothing to do with addresses and everything to do with choosing each other. Not perfect, not neat, not anything like the plan, but ours. And that was enough.